Hello, everyone, and welcome into a brand new and improved Taking the Field podcast with Stevie Mac. I'm Stephen MacDonald, bringing you back this podcast once again for the first time in almost a year, bringing it back and better than ever. This time I'm bringing it to WordPress rather than on my old site that I had. Still have the site, just choosing not to use that to host this podcast with, trying to find new and better ways to run the podcast this time around to make it, I think, a lot easier on myself and a lot easier for the listeners to be able to gain access to it. So we're going to give this thing a try. So I want to get to a couple things today, one being Michigan football, the other being Michigan State football, and then at the end, I want to kind of do this new segment where I'm going to talk about kind of something that not everybody seems to be paying attention to at the time, something that I think is kind of important that I kind of want to bring attention to. And this week, I'm going to go and talk about Minnesota football actually a little bit. And I'll talk more about that later when we get to that part of the show. But I want to start off with talking about Michigan and what they have going on with their football program right now. And really, to me, and I think anybody who has watched any of their first 5 games of the year can tell that the offense is still their biggest issue. It's still what seems to be holding this team back in a lot of ways. I think the team offensively came out in the first 4 games or so looking very plain, very just almost unoriginal in a way, and just kind of said, we're going to take the simplest, most basic, just down to the bare minimum thing we can do, and that's what we're going to put out there for these first 4 games. We're going to see what we have with that and then kind of start to really get the gears moving upwards from that point. But really, it was just really hard from, I think, an offensive standpoint to watch those first 4 games, and really, especially against Wisconsin, because Wisconsin at that point was the best team that we had played so far, and I think even still to this point, they're still the best team we've faced so far. And they just didn't look like they really ever got comfortable in that game after like the second play of the game. And I think that for a lot of Michigan fans, myself included, that really kind of angered a lot of people, that they've had the kind of struggles that they've had to this point in the season. Now they are 4-1, so it's not like they're god awful, their record blows, things like that. Like, they still are able to win games, but they're not doing it, I guess, the way that you would want them to. Like, beating Army at home in double overtime by a field goal is probably not the way you wanted that game to go. I mean, a win is a win, let's call it what it is, but it definitely wasn't when you were expected to win by double digits in that game. It's not really the way you wanted it to go. Probably gave a lot of people some heart attacks. I know it did for me, sitting there and watching that game. But it seems like they really started to kind of turn the corner the last 2 weeks or so against Rutgers and Iowa. Now, take it for what you will against Rutgers. But I mean, against Iowa, even though they only were able to put up 10 points, and it looked like for the final 3 quarters of that game, they really weren't able to get a whole lot of anything going against that Iowa defense, they still, I think, did some things that we didn't necessarily see in those first 4.5 games or so, that they all of a sudden brought out against Iowa, and maybe they didn't run it as well as you would like them to, or as well as they need to. But the fact that they at least put it out there and showed that here's what we're trying to do, here's what we're trying to move this offense toward, here's the looks that we're trying to get from this, that's something you didn't necessarily see the first 4 games. And one of the things that I saw was that Patterson kept it a couple of times on the read option, where each time he seemed to get anywhere from 4 to 6 yards each time he pulled it back. And really, for me, that's what I want to see from him every time he does that. I want to see him be able to make those kinds of reads that he was making, being able to pull the ball out like that, and being able to get 4, 5, 6 yards of play. I don't need him to be Justin Fields where he's going for 30 yards, faking the handoff to J.K. Dobbins or something like that. I don't need that. I need the guy that can go out there, make the right read, get you 4, 5, 6 yards on first down, and sets you up with a 2nd and 4, 2nd and 5. Because then if you want to run the ball up the middle, which we know they like to do with Zach Charbonnet, and I'm fine with that, I'm just sick of seeing it every single first down of every single game. And I think I'm not alone in saying that. But if you want to do that, if that's what you want your identity to be, is be a team that runs the ball on first and second down, then have Patterson do the read option on first down, pick up 4, 5, 6 yards, get yourself in a 2nd and 5, 2nd and 4, even 2nd and 6 at worst situation, then run it up the middle, get your 3 yards, a carry up the middle from Charbonnet. Then you'll be in a 3rd and 3, 3rd and 2, 3rd and 4 at worst, instead of 3rd and 7. So I think it'll put a lot less stress on the offense when they're operating in 3rd and 3 or 3rd and 2 instead of 3rd and 7 or worse, because the first 2 plays they just tried to run it up the middle and got virtually nothing. So I really thought that was encouraging because, again, they did it against Iowa. They did it, I think, at least once on first down I saw them do it, and that's exactly what they gave themselves, was the opportunity on second down to be in 2nd and 5, 2nd and 6 or so, and then they made a play on second down. And the other thing I saw was that out of that inside kind of RPO play that they've been doing time and time again for the last several games to start the year, against Iowa, and I think they might have done it a little bit against Rutgers. I didn't see the whole game to know for sure, but they might have done it at least once that I saw. But against Iowa, they did it 2, 3, maybe even 4 times, where they, instead of just handing it off up the middle and saying, okay, here we go again, we're just going to keep pounding our heads against that wall and just hope the wall eventually breaks, they had him pull it out and they rolled him out to his left. I'd like to see him go to the right more, but that's, at least they were trying to get him out of the pocket, instead of having him just sit back there acting like he has all day to throw and then get sacked 8 times like Michigan was able to do to Nate Stanley. They instead had him roll out of the pocket a few times, allow him to get into space and make a play with one-on-one situations with some of Iowa's defensive backs. Now, that worked. They had the looks, I think, but I think the execution just wasn't there. So I would say that moving forward, now that you've seen that in a game against another opponent that isn't yourself, you can now see that and learn from it and be able to improve that and get the execution to where it needs to be, so that going forward, that is something that I think you're going to see them do a lot more of, where they have them roll out to the left and have them kind of attack that backside coverage, where you're going to see a lot of those one-on-one matchups with guys like Nico Collins against a 5'10 corner. But like I said, I'd also like to see them have him go to his right every so often as well, not just exclusively going off to the left. But I think at this point, I'll kind of take what I can get as far as that goes. But I think they are showing that they're trying to move this offense forward and try new things and expand it to where it needs to be. I just think that the overall execution of what they're doing needs to get better for them to continue pushing this thing forward. And I think, like I said, being 4-1 and being 2-1 in the Big Ten is not the worst place in the world to be. But I think when you take a look at the rest of their schedule, with games still at Penn State, against Michigan State, Ohio State, and Notre Dame, that's 4 of your last 7 games right there. It's not like the schedule gets any easier from this point on. And one of the things I don't want to see for sure is just another Wisconsin game where you go up against a Penn State on the road at night and it just turns into Wisconsin 2.0 where it's, 28-7 at the half. I do not have another one of those games in me where I can just sit there and be like, yup, here we go. But you do have Maryland, Indiana, and Illinois coming up this Saturday, which I'll get to in just a second, left on the schedule as well outside of those other 4 games. And I think really your expectation for the rest of this season is just get to 9 wins. Find a way, somehow, some way to get 9-3 with a chance to go to a bowl, get to 10, pull the Jim Harbaugh special, as I've seen some people call it, where you go 10-3. Just find a way to do that. And I think the way that you have to do it or can do it is you beat Maryland, Indiana, and Illinois. Okay, that gets you to 7. And then against those other 4, you got to find some way to go 2-2. And my biggest issue with that is I don't know in those 4 games where you find 2 wins. At least right now. Again, there's 7 games left. There's 7 weeks left. A lot can change in those 7 weeks, but as it stands right now, it's hard for me to find 2 games out of those 4 where I'm like, yep, those are it. Maybe Michigan State is one where I can be like, yeah, as bad as Michigan's offense is, I don't think State's is much better. So I'd say it just comes down to which defense plays better in that game, or frankly, which offense doesn't play as bad in that game. But the 2 that I'm looking at as wins out of the 4, like if I had to pick 2 and just 2, I'd say somehow they're going to do it against Penn State, because I don't believe in Penn State's schedule in what they've played to this point. Yeah, they're 5-0. Yeah, that looks great. They look like a high-powered offense with Sean Clifford at quarterback, but I don't think to this point they've really played anybody where you can look and be like, wow, they beat them by how much? Because they've played the likes of Purdue, Buffalo, and Pitt, and I believe, off the top of my head, out of those 3, Pitt has the best record out of those 3. But none of those 3 I would look at and be like, wow, that's impressive. You know, they beat Idaho or somebody like 79-0. That means about as much as the amount of points that Idaho scored against them. So that could be a game where Penn State finally goes up against somebody that's a little more evenly matched with them skill-wise, talent-wise, and they say, wow, this isn't the same as when we're beating Purdue 35-0 at the half, or whatever that score was. 35-7, I think, was the final. But you see my point. But I think overall, I've spent so much time talking about the offense. I think the defense after the Wisconsin game really kind of took a look at itself in the mirror and said, okay, we keep having games like this where we keep giving up lots of points, lots of big plays. Teams are just running through us like we're not even there. What do we need to do to fix this? And they come out against Iowa, and I'll be honest, I thought it had the potential to be kind of a Wisconsin situation where, Michigan doesn't show up to play again, and Iowa, being a top 15 team like they were going into that game, just comes in and says, yeah, we're going to come in and take care of business. Like, you guys are nothing to us. And all Michigan's defense did was steamroll them for 8 sacks and 4 turnovers, including 3 picks of Nathan Stanley, who, as Gus Johnson would tell you in that game, Nate the Great came in with 0 turnovers to speak of on the season, and he would leave Ann Arbor with 3 in that game alone. So like I said, I think Michigan, just needs to show better execution against better teams. It's one thing to put up points against teams like Middle Tennessee State and Rutgers and, potentially Illinois this weekend, as they're favored by 21 in that game last time I checked. It's one thing to do it against them. It's another to do it against Wisconsin. It's another to do it against Penn State, Michigan State, Ohio State, teams like that. And you can say, well, look at last year. They beat Penn State and Wisconsin at home by 30-something each. And that's true. But look at how their seasons ended up after that game. Wisconsin won 8 games after winning a bowl game against a horrible Miami team. And Penn State, I believe, finished 9-4. They lost to Kentucky in their bowl game. So it's not like either one of those teams was necessarily an elite team. It's not like you went out against Ohio State and put up 50 some on them and won that game by a wide margin. And so I mentioned this before at the beginning of the segment. I wanted to talk about the Illinois game real quick. I did a Twitter poll yesterday on the point spread for Michigan versus Illinois and whether or not people liked the 21 points or if they had Michigan going above or below that. And it was really tight coming into this morning when it finished up the poll. And 39% of the vote won on Michigan going over 21. But I personally have them going under. I think it'll be more of a 30-13 game because I think this is going to be one of those games where they come out and say, okay, we're expected to win this game. We're not really, unless we turn the ball over like 4 or 5 times, we're not really in too much danger of losing this game almost no matter what happens. So we're just going to run some stuff out there and kind of see what works, what doesn't work, and kind of adjust the game plan as the game goes on. But our game plan going into it is really going to be, hey, let's try this. If it works, cool. We'll come back to it later. If it doesn't, we'll get rid of it and we'll try something else. So I don't think this is going to be one of those games where Michigan just runs up the score like in the 40s or 50s. I think they'll keep it somewhere in the 30s. I don't think Illinois is going to break the 20s, but I think Michigan, scoring-wise, will keep it somewhere in the 30s because they're going to put some stuff out there that we might not have seen before or something that we might have seen before, but they've kind of tweaked it in a way, and now they're saying, okay, we want to send this out there and see what it looks like now. We want to see if it looks better than what it did before. So I don't think they're going to be scoring it as high of a pace as what I think people expect them to do. So the next thing I'm going to get to in just a second is Michigan State and kind of where their season's been and kind of where it's going and really what you should kind of expect from them moving forward the rest of the season. And to kind of give it to you this way before we get into it, it's not really looking like it's going anywhere fast. So we'll step aside for just a second, and we will come right back on Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. Welcome back to Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. Getting into this second segment now with Michigan State football and kind of where their season's been and where I think it's going from here, judging by what we've seen so far and kind of looking ahead at their schedule and what they have left these last 7 games or so. And I think just to kind of recap, Michigan State loses at home to Arizona State for the second year in a row. Their offense played about as bad as they could in that game. They missed the field goal at the end after a, false start penalty or whatever it was that eventually took the kick away. And then this past week they got beat by Ohio State about as bad as you thought it would be. I think that we all kind of expected their defense to be able to kind of hang with Ohio State at least for that first quarter or maybe even first half. But we all kind of expected that eventually Ohio State would just kind of be like, okay, enough of you. Like, we're just going to take this game over and kind of be done with it. And that's really what ended up happening as they put up 35 on Michigan State in that game. And I kind of said it at the beginning of the season. I think Michigan State is a 7 or 8 win team again this year like they were last year because I don't think that offensively they've done enough. I don't think they've changed enough on that side of the ball from what they looked like last year, from what they were as an identity last year as far as, their execution and things like that, kind of going back to Michigan with the whole execution thing. I don't think that they've done enough to develop this offense from where it was last year to be able to say that they would be back to a 10, 11 win team like what they were 4 or 5 years ago. And I think really they're just letting their defense down. You have in East Lansing one of the 10 best defenses in all of college football, but your offense almost can't seem to get out of its own way to where you lose a 10-7 game to a team like Arizona State. Not that Arizona State isn't good by any means. I think they're a very good team with Herm Edwards down there. But that's a game that at home you're supposed to win. And for the second year in a row, they didn't do it. They didn't get the job done. Your defense gives up 10 points. All you got to do is score 12. All you got to do is nail a couple field goals and you win that game. Didn't even need a touchdown. Just nail a couple field goals and you win. They couldn't even do that much. Michigan played a 10-7 game or 10-3 game. They found a way to get it done. And I would say that your defense is actually a half step above Michigan's. So if they could do it, why couldn't you? And I really think that, they're sitting 4-2 right now as it stands. And their schedule, kind of like Michigan's, doesn't get much easier from here on out. They still have Michigan, Penn State, and Wisconsin. Wisconsin coming up this Saturday. They have those three still left on their schedule the last 7 games of the year with 2 losses already. So even if they went 4-3 in those games, you're still looking at 7-5 for the second year in a row. And if you don't win your bowl game, which they're not going to go to a good one with a 7-5 record, they're just not. But if you don't win that bowl game, you're now 7-6 for back-to-back years. And even if you do, it's not like 8-4 or 8-5, is anything to really celebrate about necessarily, especially not coming off a year where you went 7-6. Is one win better than last year really all that much of an improvement? And when you look at the overall grand scheme of the last 4 years, if they do in fact go 7-6, 8-5, whatever, it'll be their third year out of the last 4 not getting to 9 wins in a season. They'll have gone 3-9, 7-6, 7-6, or 8-5, whatever it is, whatever it ends up being. But I think realistically, unless, and someone kind of commented on this in one of my Twitter polls about it yesterday, but unless you pull out a win against somebody like Penn State, who I think the verdict is still kind of out on Penn State right now and how good they are, but unless you pull out a game like that, you're likely staring down a 7 or 8 win season right now. And that one person that commented said that people tend to forget that Michigan State has Penn State's number for the most part. He says he would pencil that one in as a win, and if Michigan can't get their offensive head out of their butt, Michigan State will win that one too. And it's not like I don't agree with that, but like I said, I think that the verdict is still out on Penn State, and also I'm not too worried about the way that things have gone in the past for Michigan State when it comes to Penn State or Michigan State or whoever. I'm more worried about what is this team now going to do. And I think that, in that 3-game stretch where they have, and they don't play them all back to back to back, but in that 3 games of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Penn State, I think that Michigan State has to win 2 out of the 3. And I think it goes back to what I said about Michigan having to win 2 out of those big 4 is which 2 are you picking? And it sounds like for this person, they would pick, if they had to pick 2, they would pick Penn State, Michigan. I would also kind of lean that way. I don't think outside of Ohio State, there's really anybody in the Big Ten overall, whether it be West or East Division. There's not really anybody outside of Ohio State that I think can hang with Wisconsin. I'd love to see what Iowa can do against them, but I'd say outside of Ohio State, you're kind of pushing it with Iowa even to say that they could hang with them. But we've seen it in the past, but I just don't think that really Michigan State, as it sits right now, and really that's the biggest thing you have to remember, this is as it looks right now, right here and now on October 9th, this is what it looks like if they played these games right now, like this weekend. And like I said, they do actually play Wisconsin this weekend, so it kind of holds true. But right here, right now, these are kind of what I've seen and my reactions to these things that I just don't see as it is right now that Michigan State sees 9 wins this year. I really don't. I think it's very hard to say that, oh yeah, they'll beat Penn State, although to their credit, it is at home and they've managed to be able to pull some stuff out against Penn State like last year. That was a better Penn State team than it was a Michigan State team. Penn State should have easily won that game, and Michigan State, like this guy said, finds a way to get it done against Penn State for whatever reason. So I think that'll be a really intriguing game to watch for that reason, that I would expect, even though it's at Michigan State, that Penn State would be able to go in there and to be able to take care of business. But for whatever reason, Michigan State, I cannot count them out right now from that game. Just like I can't count them out from going to Michigan in a couple weeks and taking care of business there. I just can't. I haven't seen enough from Michigan, especially offensively, mostly offensively, I should say, to be able to say, oh yeah, we're going to go in, Michigan's going to go in, they're going to beat them by 2 touchdowns. I cannot say that. I can't even definitively say that with how good Michigan State's defense is, that Michigan, if they don't figure out their stuff on offense, I can't even say Michigan will score 2 touchdowns in that game, let alone win by 2 touchdowns in that game. But I think that overall, if you're a Michigan State fan, this will, I think, end up being a very disappointing season for you, coming off a 7-win season and more than likely staring down another 7-8 win season unless they pull out a game against Michigan or Penn State or both, or if they go and upset Wisconsin or something miraculous like that happens to the point where they reach 9-10 wins. But I think at this point, the likelihood of that happening is almost decreasing by the day when you think about it. So that's what I wanted to get to with Michigan State and where they're at right now and where they're going the rest of the way. The last thing I want to get to is this for real? Minnesota is 5-0, but do you buy it? Do you buy that this team can be or is for real as we push ahead in this Big Ten schedule with 7 more weeks to go? I'll get to that one next in the final segment of Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. All right, welcome to the third and final segment of the Taking the Field podcast with Stevie Mack, the first episode of this renewed podcast. And the final thing I wanted to get to, I mentioned before the break, is this for real? Minnesota is 5-0, but do you buy it? Just to kind of take a look inside this 5-0 start for the Gophers. They're 5-0. They're 2-0 in the Big Ten. They're one of the 4 remaining unbeaten teams in the Big Ten at 5-0, with a remaining schedule of home against Nebraska. Then they go on the road to Rutgers. They come back to play Maryland and Penn State. Then they go on the road for 2 games against Iowa and Northwestern, then come back home for one final time to face the Badgers of Wisconsin to end the season. And I think there are definitely a lot of winnable games in there. I think Nebraska they should win. I think Rutgers they'll definitely win. I think Maryland they'll win. Northwestern I think they will. I'm kind of in the middle on that. I haven't really seen a lot of Northwestern, but from what I have seen, they don't look all that impressive like I would have thought they would be this year. I kind of figured they'd be in that top 3 of the West division, but I think right now for me it's Wisconsin, Iowa, then Minnesota are the top 3. So I think that's a winnable game for them. So you're talking 4 out of their last 7 are probably easily winnable games, and I think games that they will, unless the wheels fall off this thing the second half of the year, unless PJ Fleck's boat starts sinking, row the boat, unless that starts happening the second half of the year, those are 4 games that they should win. They should be favored in, and that will get them to their 9 wins. And I think they haven't really exactly played the toughest schedule yet when you look at those 5 games that they've played and won. They played South Dakota State to start the year. Then a few weeks later, they played Georgia Southern. Those 2 games as part of their non-conference portion of the schedule. And then their 2 Big Ten wins were against Purdue and Illinois. And I'm not really sure how they'll look when they start playing some of that tougher competition, like when they get to the final week of the season against Wisconsin, when they go on the road to play Iowa, when they bring Penn State in to play them. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how they play in those games, because even in the games leading up to Penn State with Nebraska, Rutgers, and Maryland, it's not like those teams are Ohio State or Michigan State or Wisconsin or anybody. Those are games that, like I said, I think in all 3, they're going to be favored to win. So it's that latter portion of the schedule against Penn State, Iowa, and Northwestern where I think you're really going to start to see what this team is made of and if they are, in fact, for real. But just thinking about it, they could go into that Penn State game 8-0 with 4 more games to go. But in those final 4 games, they could go 1-3 with a slight possibility, I'd say, of going 0-4. But I did a poll on this on Twitter, and I had them personally going 9-3 with losses to Iowa, Penn State, and Wisconsin. And 50% of the vote had them winning 6 to 8 games. 43% had them winning 9 to 10. That's where I had them. And then the other 7% had them winning 10 or more. And the couple people that commented on this poll in particular had them also going 9-3 for kind of the same reasons that I said. One of them said they'll win 9 games easily and possibly 10. They have some easy games and they've looked decent. Nebraska doesn't really scare anyone. I don't see anything false about that statement. I tend to agree with that. And then the next one says, have wins against Nebraska, Rutgers, Maryland, and Northwestern. It's crazy to think that Minnesota will probably be a 9-win team, because really, when's the last time we've been able to say that? It's at least been a couple of years now since they've been at that point where they're a team that can be looked at and respected in the Big Ten as an 8, 9, 10 win team. Well, I'd actually say more 9, 10 win team. And they have a very real chance of that happening this year. And I wouldn't really put it past PJ Fleck and the Gophers to be able to do that. And I think at this point where they stand right now at 5-0, seeing how weak I think the West is outside of that top 3 that I mentioned in the beginning of the segment with Wisconsin, Penn State, and Minnesota, or maybe it was the last segment, whatever. But with Wisconsin, Penn State, and Minnesota, that to me is your top 3 in that division. And then there's kind of everybody else. It's just a crapshoot after that. And they play a lot of that crapshoot the rest of the season. Yeah, you have Wisconsin, but you have Nebraska. Yeah, you have Penn State, but you have Northwestern. So there definitely are games on their schedule that I think they should and will win. And I think at the end of the regular season, when it's all said and done, you're going to see Minnesota with a 9-3, 10-2 record if they can go out there and shock Iowa or somebody. And you're going to see them as one of probably the top 2 teams in the West. Because if they do go out there and beat Iowa, I would say that Minnesota will finish a game higher than Iowa in the West standings. And I think it's been a while since we've seen Minnesota, not just in the top half of their division, but as one of the top, 4 or 5 teams in the Big Ten. So, and I'd say right now you could argue that they are probably one of the 5 best teams in the Big Ten. I'd say it's Ohio State, Wisconsin, Michigan, Iowa, Minnesota. Maybe not necessarily in that order towards the latter 3, but I definitely think it's Ohio State and Wisconsin. Then it's kind of everybody else right now. Everybody's kind of seeing where they fit in, but is it real or not? Minnesota being 5-0 and where they're going the rest of the season, 9-3, like I said, is really my expectation for them to finish out the season. Yes, I would say it's definitely real. I definitely think that you should believe it and what they're doing out there in Minnesota right now. And really, if they're able to do that, they will be, I think, one of the top 2 teams in the West. They won't make it to Indy, obviously, but I think from where they were a year ago to where they are now, they are in a much better position as a football team and as a program than what they were. And I think you'll kind of see that more moving forward. So those are the 3 things I wanted to get to. We covered Michigan, Michigan State, and Minnesota as kind of our surprise team in the Big Ten right now on the first episode of Taking the Field with Stevie Mack.